Blood is supposed to be thicker than water, but no one mentions it can still drown you. When I graduated top of my class, I stared at 4 empty seats. My family chose my sister's dog's birthday over my degree. So, I erased my name. Years later, when they begged a powerful stranger to save them from ruin, they didn't realize they were pleading with the daughter they discarded. My name is Harper Kensington now. But for the first 22 years of my life, I was Chloe Sinclair. The Sinclair family of Bellevue, Washington, looked immaculate on paper. My father, Robert Sinclair, was a mid-level corporate director who wore tailored suits and treated his reputation like a fragile glass sculpture. My mother, Sylvia, was a woman whose entire personality was built around country club gossip, pristine manicures, and cultivating the perfect image. And then there was Savannah. Savannah was 2 years older than me, and from the moment she could walk, she was the undisputed son of the Sinclair solar system. She had my mother's striking blonde hair and my father's charisma, a potent combination that made her the darling of every room she entered. I, on the other hand, was the quiet brunette with a penchant for books, inheriting the sharp angles of a forgotten great-aunt and an introverted nature that my mother treated as a personal insult. Growing up in Savannah's shadow wasn't just cold, it was suffocating. There was never a singular, dramatic moment of abuse. Instead, my childhood was 1,000 tiny paper cuts of neglect. When I was 12, I won the state science fair. I remember running up the driveway, clutching my oversized gold trophy, my heart hammering against my ribs. I threw open the front door, shouting for my parents. I found them in the living room, gathered around Savannah, who was crying hysterically because she hadn't made the varsity cheer squad. My mother looked up at me, saw the trophy, and hissed, "Not now. Chloe, can't you see your sister is devastated? Put that tacky thing in your room and go make her some tea." That tacky thing stayed in my closet. Savannah got a brand new convertible the next week to lift her spirits. The disparity only widened as we grew older. Savannah drifted through high school on charm and C-minuses, eventually dropping out of a local community college to pursue a career as a lifestyle influencer. My parents funded her luxury apartment in downtown Seattle, bought her designer bags for her unboxing videos, and constantly bragged to their friends about her growing follower count. I, meanwhile, practically lived in the library. I realized early on that my only escape from the Sinclair household would be through sheer, unadulterated academic force. I worked 3 part-time jobs during high school tutoring, bagging groceries at Trader Joe's, and doing data entry for a local real estate firm, saving every penny. I knew I couldn't rely on my parents. That suspicion was violently confirmed the summer before my senior year. I had found my dream school, a prestigious university in Chicago with a top-tier financial economics program. I had saved $8,000 from my jobs to help cover my freshman room and board. I kept it in a joint savings account that my father had set up for me when I was a minor. One morning, I logged into the banking portal to check my balance. It was 0. Panic seized me. I confronted my father in his home office. Robert didn't even look up from his laptop. "Oh, yes," he said casually, adjusting his reading glasses. Savannah had an opportunity to do a brand trip to Tulum. It was crucial for her networking, Chloe. "You understand. You're smart. You'll get scholarships. Savannah needs the investment right now." The investment. My blood ran cold. They had stolen my literal sweat and tears to pay for my sister's margaritas in Mexico. "That was my money," I whispered, my voice trembling with a rage I had never felt before. My mother walked in, carrying a basket of laundry. "Don't be dramatic, Chloe. Family helps family. When Savannah makes it big, she'll pay you back. Besides, you live under our roof for free." I didn't scream. I didn't cry. Something inside me, some fragile, desperate thread that had spent 18 years trying to weave a bond with these people, simply snapped. I walked back to my room, shut the door, and began applying for every obscure scholarship in the country. When the acceptance letter from Chicago arrived 9 months later, offering me a full-ride academic scholarship, I didn't tell them. I didn't celebrate with them. I quietly signed the paperwork, packed 2 suitcases, and left a note on the kitchen island that said I was moving out. My mother texted me a week later. Hope you're settling in. Savannah got a new puppy. We're so tired. Call you Sunday. Quote Minister. Call you Sunday. They never called. College was my sanctuary. For 4 years, I was just Chloe, the hyper-focused economics major. I built a life far away from the toxic ecosystem of my family. I had a brilliant mentor, Dr. Harrison Avery, who saw my potential and pushed me to excel in algorithmic trading and private equity modeling. I had a small, fiercely loyal group of friends. Doctor. Yet, the trauma of being the unloved child is a stubborn parasite. No matter how much I achieved, a tiny, broken part of me still craved my parents' validation. I wanted them to see me. I wanted them to sit in an auditorium, watch me cross a stage, and finally, for one fleeting second, realize that I was worth being proud of. Graduation was approaching. I was not only graduating summa cum laude, but I had also been selected as the valedictorian for the School of Economics. It was a massive honor. I decided to extend an olive branch. 6 months before the ceremony, I called my mother. I laid out the dates. I explained the magnitude of the achievement. "Mom, I'm giving the commencement speech," I said, my voice tight with cautious hope. "It would mean everything to me if you, Dad, and Savannah were there. I'll even pay for your flights and hotel." "Oh, Chloe, that's nice," Sylvia said, sounding distracted. "May 18th? Let me check the calendar. Yes, that should be fine. Savannah's schedule is very busy, but we'll make it work." I didn't leave it to chance. Using the first bonus from my secured postgrad job at a top-tier wealth management firm, I bought 3 first-class round-trip tickets from Seattle to Chicago. I booked them a suite at the Drake Hotel. I sent them a meticulously detailed itinerary. For months, I reminded them. Every time, they promised they were coming. "We wouldn't miss it, kiddo," my father had said on the phone 3 days before the flight, looking forward to a steak dinner in the city. The morning of graduation was a crisp, brilliant Chicago day. The air buzzed with the electric energy of thousands of students and their screaming, crying, joyous families. My stomach was a knot of anxiety and anticipation. I checked my phone. Nothing. "No, we landed." Text. "No, on our way to the stadium." I texted my mother. "In the staging area. Your tickets are at will call, Section B, Row 4, seats 1 to 4. See you soon. Delivered." Not read. I pushed down the rising panic. They were probably just navigating the crowds. They had the itinerary. They had the hotel. They wouldn't do this. Not today. Not on the biggest day of my life. The ceremony began. Pomp and circumstance echoed through the massive indoor arena. Thousands of us marched in, a sea of black gowns and colourful hoods. As I took my seat near the stage, I immediately locked onto Section B. My breath hitched. Row 4. There was a man in a blue shirt in seat 5, a woman in seat 6, but seats 1, 2, 3, and 4 were empty. Glaringly, agonizingly empty. Traffic, I told myself. Chicago traffic is a nightmare. They'll be here. The dean of the college gave his opening remarks. The seats remained empty. It was time for my speech. Dr. Avery introduced me, reading off my accolades. The crowd applauded politely. I walked up to the podium, adjusting the microphone. I looked out over the sea of faces, proud parents wiping tears, siblings holding up embarrassing blown-up photos on cardboard cutouts, fathers holding bouquets of flowers. And then I looked at Section B. Row 4. Empty. I delivered a 10-minute speech on economic resilience and the power of forward momentum, maintaining perfect eye contact with 4 empty blue plastic chairs. My voice didn't waver, but inside, I was bleeding out. Every word I spoke felt like ash in my mouth. When the ceremony ended, the arena erupted into a chaotic festival of hugs and camera flashes. I watched my roommate, Madeline, get swallowed in a massive group hug by her parents, grandparents, and 3 brothers. I stood alone near the exit doors, clutching the leather-bound diploma cover to my chest like a shield. I pulled out my phone. Still no texts. I dialed my mother's number. It rang 4 times before going to voicemail. I dialed my father. Voicemail. Finally, I dialed Savannah. She picked up on the second ring. Upbeat pop music blasted in the background, along with the sound of clinking glasses. "Hello?" Savannah shouted over the noise. "Savannah? Where are you?" I asked, my voice terrifyingly calm. "Where are Mom and Dad?" "Oh my God. Chloe. Hi," she chirped. "Listen, I am so sorry about today. It's just been absolute chaos here." "Here? You're not in Chicago?" "Chicago? God, no, babe," she laughed. "Okay, so here's the thing. Jackson, the guy I've been seeing who produces those fitness podcasts. He surprised me with a launch party for my new line of essential oils. It's a huge networking event, Chloe. Like, literal PR executives are here." I couldn't exactly leave. The arena spun around me. "You didn't get on the flight?" "Well, no. And Mom and Dad couldn't just leave me alone for this. I was having a total panic attack this morning about the catering. Mom had to stay to help me organize the gift bags, and Dad is schmoozing the investors. You know how important this is for my brand." My vision blurred. "A launch party? For essential oils?" "Savannah," I whispered, the words tearing from my throat. "It was my college graduation. I was valedictorian. I paid $3,000 for your flights." "Chloe, don't be selfish," my mother's voice suddenly cut in. She must have taken the phone from Savannah. "We're really proud of you, sweetie. We are. But it's just a ceremony. They just hand you a piece of paper. You're smart. You have your whole life figured out. Savannah was in a crisis this morning, and this launch is make or break for her. You have to understand." "I see," I said. It was the truest thing I had ever spoken. I finally, truly, saw them. "We'll take you out to dinner next time you fly home," my mother added brightly. "Take lots of pictures." "Bye, honey." The line went dead. I lowered the phone. Around me, families were laughing, celebrating, existing in a warmth I had been denied my entire life. I looked at the dark screen of my phone, and in that precise second, the desperate, pleading girl named Chloe Sinclair died. I didn't cry. The tears simply weren't there anymore. The well had been permanently poisoned. I walked out of the arena, took a cab straight to the Drake Hotel, and walked to the front desk. "Hi, I need to cancel a reservation under Sinclair," I told the concierge. "They won't be checking in. Ever." I returned to my dorm, stripped off the graduation gown, and threw it in the trash. I packed my belongings into the same 2 suitcases I had arrived with 4 years ago. I opened my laptop, logged into my bank, and transferred my funds into a new account, one at a completely different bank. Then, I opened a new browser tab. I searched for the legal requirements for a name change in the state of Illinois. If they wanted to treat me like I didn't exist, I was going to give them exactly what they wanted. Chloe Sinclair was gone. I was about to become someone they could never touch again. The legal death of Chloe Sinclair cost exactly $314 in filing fees at the Cook County Circuit Court. I sat in the sterile, fluorescent-lit courtroom, wearing a cheap navy blazer, clutching a manila folder containing the petition for my name change. When the judge, a tired-looking woman named Honorable Patricia Collins, called my docket number, I stood up. She asked me the standard questions. Was I attempting to evade debt? Was I fleeing criminal prosecution? "No, Your Honor," I replied, my voice steady. She stamped the paper. The gavel fell. In that quiet, unremarkable echo, the invisible girl from Bellevue ceased to exist. Harper Kensington was born. The name wasn't arbitrary. Harper was for Harper Lee, a nod to the quiet observation of human flaws. Kensington just sounded like money, like a fortress, like something impenetrable. Armed with my court order, I methodically dismantled my past. I closed every email address linked to the Sinclairs. I threw my phone into a dumpster behind a Chicago diner and bought a new one with an unlisted number. I deleted all social media. I left no forwarding address with the university, opting to have my actual diploma mailed to a P.O. box. By the time my parents inevitably realized I hadn't answered a text in a month, I was a ghost. I took my pristine resume, my new driver's license, and my seething, icy ambition to New York City. Through the recommendation of my college mentor, Dr. Avery, I landed an entry-level analyst position at Sterling and Hayes, a notoriously ruthless private equity firm in Manhattan. The grief of losing a family, even a terrible one, is a strange, heavy thing. But instead of letting it crush me, I used it as jet fuel. While my peers were going out for drinks in Tribeca, I was at my desk at 2 a.m., analyzing distressed asset portfolios and building complex financial models. I didn't have a safety net. I didn't have a childhood bedroom to retreat to if I failed. I had only my intellect and the absolute refusal to ever be powerless again. My ascent was terrifyingly fast. By 25, I was a senior associate. By 27, I was managing a multi-million-dollar fund under the firm's senior partner, William Sterling. William was a sharp, calculating man who recognized my hunger because it mirrored his own. He taught me the architecture of corporate leverage, how to buy debt, restructure failing companies, and hold the fate of entire organizations in the palm of my hand. I physically transformed as well. The mousy, slouching brunette from Washington was gone. I cut my hair into a sharp, precise bob. I wore tailored, monochromatic suits that cost more than my parents' first cars. I moved with a cold, absolute authority, and I watched them, not out of longing, but out of a tactical necessity to ensure the walls I built were high enough. I paid a discreet private investigator in Seattle, a small retainer, to run a background check on the Sinclairs once a year. The reports were a predictable tragedy of hubris. Savannah's essential oil line, the one that had cost me my graduation, tanked within 18 months. The fitness podcaster, Jackson, dumped her for a younger Instagram model. But instead of cutting their losses, my parents doubled down. They treated Savannah's failure not as a lack of talent, but as a lack of adequate funding. To maintain the illusion of their perfect, successful daughter, Robert Sinclair began bleeding his own assets dry. He cashed out his 401k. He took out a second mortgage on the Bellevue house. He leveraged everything to fund a massive, ill-conceived brick-and-mortar venture. The Savannah Glow Wellness Center, a luxury spa and retail space in downtown Seattle. It was a catastrophic financial decision. They signed a 10-year commercial lease at the peak of the market, taking a massive loan from a mid-tier regional lender, Crescent Financial. When I read that particular report in my penthouse apartment overlooking the Hudson River, I remember swirling a glass of Cabernet and feeling a profound, chilling sense of calm. The math didn't lie. They were building a castle on quicksand. At 28, I left Sterling and Hayes to start my own firm, Kensington Global. I specialized in acquiring and restructuring distressed commercial debt. I was the apex predator of the financial food chain. Companies that were drowning in unpaid loans would have their debt bought by my firm for pennies on the dollar, and I would either liquidate their assets or force a hostile restructuring. I was wealthy, respected, and completely insulated. I had built an empire from the ashes of my own family's neglect. And then, 7 years after I walked out of that graduation arena, the universe decided to balance the scales. It started on a Tuesday in late October, the kind of dreary, punishing afternoon where the Manhattan rain lashed sideways against the floor-to-ceiling glass of my corner office. I was standing by the window, watching the yellow cabs crawl like beetles through the grey sludge of Wall Street, when my vice president of acquisitions knocked on the open door. David Cole was a brilliant, relentlessly numbers-obsessed analyst who treated corporate debt like a competitive sport. He walked in and dropped a spectacularly thick, leather-bound binder onto the center of my mahogany desk. It landed with a heavy, satisfying thud. We just finalized the legal transfer of the Crescent Financial portfolio, David announced, taking a seat in one of the leather armchairs opposite my desk. Crescent Financial had been a mid-tier regional lender operating out of the Pacific Northwest. They had gone under a month prior, their foundation completely buckling under the weight of catastrophically bad commercial real estate loans. When they filed for bankruptcy, Kensington Global swooped in. We had purchased their most toxic, non-performing debt at a blind auction for exactly 28 cents on the dollar. Excellent, I said, turning away from the rain and walking over to my desk. Did you find any immediate flags in the first pass? A few structural anomalies. Mostly standard negligence, David replied, tapping the cover of the binder with his pen. But there's one specific commercial property in the Seattle metro area that is completely underwater. It's a total write-off. Over $4.2 million in default. The borrowers have missed 7 consecutive payments, and according to the attached tax filings, the underlying business is generating virtually zero gross revenue. It reads like a vanity project, some sort of luxury wellness spa and holistic retail space. If it's a dead asset, we call the loan immediately and move to foreclose on the collateral, I stated, my tone automatic. It was standard operating procedure. What exactly did they put up for collateral? David swiped through his tablet, bringing up the asset list. That's the interesting part. They leveraged the commercial property itself, but because the business had no history, the bank required personal guarantees. They put up their primary residence as secondary collateral. A sprawling, 4-bedroom, waterfront estate in Bellevue, Washington, valued at roughly $3.8 million. If we foreclose, we take the commercial space and their home. My hand, which had been reaching for my coffee cup, stopped in mid-air. The silence in my office suddenly felt dense, charged with a strange, suffocating, static electricity. Let me see the borrower details, I said, my voice dropping to a quiet murmur. David flipped the heavy binder open to the flagged section and spun it around so I could read it. I looked down at the stark black ink printed on the crisp white page. Borrower entity: Savannah Glow, LLC, primary guarantor. Robert Sinclair, co-guarantor. Sylvia Sinclair. I stared at the names until the letters began to vibrate and blur at the edges of my vision. 7 years. It had been 7 years of absolute, unbroken silence. 7 years of building an impenetrable fortress of wealth and reputation, of erasing every psychological trace of them from my cellular makeup. And here they were, neatly bound in a distressed financial portfolio on my desk, completely and utterly at my mercy. Harper? David asked, his brow furrowing as he noticed my sudden, statuesque stillness. Is something wrong with the file? No, I breathed, slowly closing the binder. I traced the leather edge with my index finger. Nothing is wrong, David. In fact, the math here is quite perfect. But we won't just push this through the automated legal department queue. I want to handle this specific default personally. David blinked, clearly taken aback. Personally? Harper, with all due respect, it's a $4 million default. That's a rounding error for us. Why do you want to manage a small fry regional foreclosure? It's a matter of establishing our reputation in the Pacific Northwest market, I lied smoothly, meeting his gaze with unblinking confidence. I want to make an example of this one to show other regional borrowers that Kensington Global doesn't negotiate with negligent vanity projects. Send a formal notice of default to the guarantors via certified mail. Inform them that we now hold their paper. Give them exactly 14 days to pay the balance in full, or we seize both the spa and the Bellevue estate. They won't be able to pay, David warned, shaking his head. Their liquidity is entirely non-existent. They are broke. I am acutely aware of that, I said, a slow, razor-thin smile touching the corners of my mouth. When they panic, and they will panic, they will ask for a meeting to negotiate restructuring terms. Grant it, but tell them they are required to fly to New York to meet with the CEO in person. The trap was meticulously set, and the Sinclairs walked right into it with the predictable, flailing desperation of drowning people. 3 days after the notice of default was delivered to the Bellevue house, my executive assistant, a fiercely protective woman named Beatrice, buzzed my intercom. She informed me that a frantic, borderline hysterical man named Robert Sinclair had called the office. He had begged, practically wept through the phone, demanding to speak with Mr. Kensington. Beatrice, perfectly trained in corporate stonewalling, calmly informed him that Miss Kensington was the CEO, and she had graciously agreed to a single, strict 30-minute meeting the following Thursday at 10 in the morning. When the morning of the meeting finally arrived, I woke up with a pulse as steady and rhythmic as a metronome. I didn't feel the familiar, sickening anxiety of my youth. I felt only the cold, surgical precision of an executioner. I chose my armor with deliberate intent, a bespoke, razor-sharp charcoal Tom Ford suit, a silver Cartier watch, and a pair of black stiletto heels that echoed like distant gunfire on the polished marble floors of the Kensington Global lobby. I took my seat at the head of the massive, 20-foot glass table in the main boardroom. The morning sun was positioned directly behind me, streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows and casting my face into deep silhouette. At exactly 10 a.m., the heavy oak doors of the boardroom clicked open. "Miss Kensington," Beatrice announced softly, stepping aside. "The representatives from Savannah Glow LLC have arrived." "Send them in," I said, keeping my eyes fixed on the tablet in front of me. They walked in, and the sheer, violent shock of their physical deterioration almost cracked my professional composure. They had aged horribly, worn down by the grinding friction of their own arrogance. My father, Robert, once the undisputed picture of country club swagger, looked shrunken and frail. His suit hung loosely on his diminished frame, his hair completely grey. Sylvia looked brittle. Her pristine manicures and radiant tan were gone, replaced by the deep, hollowed lines of chronic, inescapable stress. And trailing just behind them was Savannah, the undisputed golden child, the influencer whose essential oil launch was deemed infinitely more valuable than my valedictory speech. She was 31 now, but the vibrant, center of the universe energy she used to wield like a weapon had been entirely snuffed out. She wore a faded blazer and kept her eyes glued to the floor, looking like a ghost haunting her own life. They stood awkwardly at the far end of the long glass table. Because of the blinding glare from the Manhattan skyline behind me, they couldn't make out my features. They simply saw the intimidating silhouette of the CEO who held their survival in her hands. "Miss Kensington," Robert started, his voice trembling with a terrifying blend of raw fear and forced corporate politeness. He clutched a cheap, scuffed briefcase to his chest. "Thank you so much for agreeing to see us today. I know our account is severely distressed, but I assure you, we are on the absolute verge of turning the wellness center around. We just need a 6-month grace period on the loan to find new investors." I let the silence stretch. I let it hang heavy in the air, ticking by for 10, 20, 30 seconds, until the discomfort in the room became a physical weight pressing down on their shoulders. Slowly, I leaned back in my leather chair and steepled my fingers. A 6-month grace period on $4.2 million of highly leveraged toxic debt, I said softly, letting my natural voice ring out through the cavernous room. At the sound of my tone, the familiar cadence, the unmistakable pitch, Sylvia's head snapped up violently. I leaned forward, deliberately stepping out of the shadows and letting the harsh, unforgiving overhead boardroom lights illuminate my face perfectly. I stared directly into my mother's terrified eyes. "That's a very risky investment, Robert," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that cut through the room like glass. "And, as you told me 7 years ago, you really only invest in the child who's going to make it big." The silence in the boardroom was absolute. For 30 agonizing seconds, the only sound was the faint, muffled hum of Manhattan traffic 20 stories below. "Chloe!" Sylvia finally whispered, her voice cracking into a high, reedy pitch. She gripped the edge of the glass table so hard her knuckles turned stark white. "Oh my God! Chloe! Is it really you?" "My name is Harper Kensington." I replied, my tone flat, devoid of any emotional inflection. I didn't smile. I didn't frown. I simply observed them with the detached curiosity of a scientist studying a mildly interesting bacterial culture. I don't understand, Robert stammered, his eyes darting frantically around the luxurious boardroom, taking in the mahogany paneling, the original modern art on the walls, and finally, my custom-tailored suit. You're the CEO of Kensington Global? We thought you were just an analyst in Chicago. We tried calling. You tried calling a disconnected number 5 weeks after you missed my graduation. I corrected him smoothly. And then, according to the private investigator I hired, you gave up completely, which brings us to the matter at hand. Savannah Glow, LLC. Chloe, please, Savannah blurted out, taking a step forward. Her eyes were welling with tears. We've missed you so much, Mom cried for months. You can't be doing this. You're our sister. Your family. Family, I repeated, letting the word roll around my mouth like a bitter sip of wine. I opened the thick financial binder on my desk. Let's talk about family investments, Savannah. 7 years ago, I had exactly $8,412 in a savings account. Money I earned, bagging groceries, and entering real estate data. Money that was stolen to fund a brand trip to Tulum. Robert flinched as if I had struck him. We didn't steal it, we borrowed it. You took it. I cut him off, my voice dropping an octave. And then, you took my graduation. You chose a failed launch party for essential oils over the daughter who begged you to show up for her. So, please, do not stand in my boardroom and invoke the word family. It is a currency you bankrupt yourselves of a very long time ago. I pulled a beautifully printed, thick legal document from the folder and slid it across the glass table. It stopped precisely in front of Robert. This is the reality of your situation, I said, tapping my pen against the table. You owe $4.2 million on the commercial lease and build-out for the wellness center. You have defaulted on 6 consecutive payments. Crescent Financial went under, and Kensington Global bought your paper. The loan has an acceleration clause, which I exercised 3 days ago. The entire balance is due immediately. Robert looked down at the document, his hands shaking violently. Chloe, Harper, we don't have it. The spa isn't generating revenue. The foot traffic on Bellevue Way just dried up. We put everything into it. The house, my retirement. I know, I said. I read your financials. You leveraged your primary residence, the 4-bedroom estate in Bellevue, as collateral. Which means, as of right now, Kensington Global technically owns the roof over your head. Sylvia let out a strangled sob, burying her face in her hands. You can't do this. You can't put your own mother on the street. It's cruel. We made mistakes, Chloe. But we are your parents. I'm not putting you on the street, Sylvia. Your own spectacular financial incompetence is putting you on the street, I stated, leaning forward, resting my forearms on the glass. I am simply the mechanic executing the math. You built a house of cards to protect Savannah's fragile ego. And the wind finally blew. Savannah stepped up to the table, her face flushed with a sudden, desperate anger. You planned this. You bought our debt just to ruin us. I actually laughed. It was a short, sharp sound. Don't flatter yourself, Savannah. My firm acquires hundreds of millions of dollars in distressed debt every quarter. You were just a toxic asset buried in a portfolio I bought for pennies on the dollar. When my VP flagged your file, I didn't see an opportunity for revenge. I saw a $4 million tax write-off. I pointed to the document in front of Robert. That is a deed in lieu of foreclosure, I explained, slipping into the cold, clinical cadence of my profession. If you sign it today, you voluntarily surrender the commercial property and your primary residence in Bellevue to Kensington Global. In exchange, I will forgive the remaining deficiency balance. You will walk away with nothing, but you will not owe me $4 million. And I will not drag you through a humiliating, highly public Chapter 7 bankruptcy that will make the front page of the Seattle Times. Robert stared at the paper. A tear slipped down his cheek, splashing onto the pristine white page. We'll have nowhere to go. I'm 62 years old. I suggest you look into affordable apartments in Tacoma, I replied without a shred of pity. I hear the rent is reasonable. How can you be so cold? Sylvia whispered, looking at me as if I were a monster she had never seen before. Where did you learn to be so heartless? I met her gaze perfectly. I learned it from watching you, Mum. I just perfected the application. The silence returned. Heavier this time. It was the sound of absolute defeat. Robert picked up the gold pen resting beside the document. His hand trembled so violently he could barely grip it. He looked at Savannah, who was openly weeping, and then at Sylvia, who was staring blankly at the wall. With a slow, agonizing breath, Robert Sinclair signed his name. He signed away the spa. He signed away the sprawling house I grew up in. He signed away the illusion of their perfection. He slid the document back across the table. It's done, he whispered, his voice hollow. Are you happy now? Happiness isn't a metric I track in this office, Robert, I said, closing the binder. I pressed a button on my desk phone. Beatrice, please escort the representatives from Savannah Glow LLC to the elevators. Our business is concluded. They didn't say another word. They turned and walked out of the boardroom, their shoulders slumped, 3 ghosts fading into the background of my life. I watched the heavy oak doors click shut behind them. I sat alone in the boardroom for a long time. I didn't feel a rush of euphoric vengeance. I didn't feel a sudden, miraculous healing of my childhood wounds. What I felt was simply light. The suffocating weight of my past, the desperate need for their validation, the phantom pain of the empty seats at my graduation, it was all gone, replaced by the quiet, absolute certainty that I had built my own ground to stand on. 6 months later, the Bellevue estate was liquidated, sold to a tech executive from Microsoft for a tidy profit. The commercial space that used to house Savannah's doomed wellness center was gutted and leased to a high-end coffee roaster. I received one final report from my private investigator. Robert and Sylvia had indeed moved to a cramped 2-bedroom apartment in a dreary suburb of Tacoma. Robert was working as a greeter at a hardware store, and Savannah, the golden child who was always destined for greatness, was currently employed as a shift supervisor at a fast-fashion retail store in the South Center Mall. I read the report, shredded it, and threw it in the recycling bin. I never hired the investigator again. I didn't need to. The ledger was finally balanced. Some people believe forgiveness is the only path to peace. I disagree. Sometimes, true peace is just a signed deed of foreclosure and the absolute silence of a closed door. I did not ruin my family. I simply handed them the bill for the life they built on my back. Blood might be thicker than water, but it washes away just the same when the storm finally breaks over you.